Talking to Teachers. Today I'm talking to Jordan Moog, an ex-colleague from the American Community School of Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates. Jordan and I discuss how she wants to become better at writing beside her students, the gift of remote learning in slowing things down and prioritizing, and finally we talk about her realization around the power of revision. So enjoy the conversation and let me know what you think. Jordan, thank you very much for joining me.
Anytime. I'm excited to be here.
So Jordan, just what do you teach again?
So I teach 3 different preps. I teach global studies, which is grade 9, AP US history, which is grade 10, and activism and entrepreneurship, which covers all 4 grades, so grade 9 through 12. Yes, I definitely do. I think I definitely see myself more as a creative writer. I love to journal and I like to write poems. So to me, that's more creative writing. I wouldn't say I'm the first to write any sort of like scholarly article. That's definitely not what I lean towards. But I would say yes, I'm more of a journaler or a writer in that way, more of an emotional writer. Yeah.
Do you see a space for like that sort of creative, risk-free writing in your subject?
I do. I think I like to try to do this, just like what I call quick writes or reflection writes at the end of units, and let them kind of take some time. I don't do it as much as I wish I would, because I feel like we get a lot of pressure to try to meet our timeline and our curriculum scope and sequence. But at the end of our World War II unit, which is really heavy, like having a time to quick write on something that stood out to them. And it can be anything from a person that we talked about in that curriculum or in that unit, or, an event or a process or development that we looked at. And they can write about, and I've done this a few times. Last year, I think I did about 3 or 4 pre-COVID experience, but which I probably should have done it more when we were going through the crazy, but just like reflect on what we just talked about. Let's reflect on like something like trench warfare in World War I. That's like really hard to digest and understand, as well as just emotionally accept. And oftentimes those kind of things can trigger different things in students' lives. So having moments to like quick write. I do like temperature checks in my class often. So I'll say, like a 2 or 3 question Google form. How are you doing on a scale of 1 to 5? Explain to me why you're feeling that way, if you're willing. A lot of it's optional, obviously, and kids, ability to feel comfortable explaining. But oftentimes they'll use that space because I do give them 5 to 10 minutes to share. That's not your more critical writing. That's definitely more just reflective, but it allows them to have a space to do that. So that's another kind of piece of it, I would say. I would say argumentative writing. So being able to write and back a claim with solid evidence. Oftentimes that comes from historical sources, primary and secondary. In my AP US history class this year, it's definitely going to challenge me as a writing teacher, because AP US history really teaches to the exam. I don't like that thought, because I like to get creative and push my students in other ways as well. But we do work on like short answer questions, long answer questions, document-based questions, where they're able to essentially answer an argumentative prompt with a strong claim that allows them to be backed with evidence pulled from sources. So I think, a broad term would be argumentative writing is our focus mostly. I don't think I ever looked at like small answers as like writing. I think when you think of writing, oftentimes people think of long essays, or maybe that was how I viewed it. When I think of, we're going to write an essay, or this is, more lengthy writing versus something like an SAQ when they answer it on the APUSH exam is 2 to 3 sentences, really, if they do a good job. But that's still what we have to really work on. And it's a skill, that's a process, and it's a development that we're obviously working throughout the year. I would say one of the things I'm doing this year and was inspired by APUSH is thesis formulas, which is something that I haven't really done in the past. I've allowed for a lot more autonomy in their choice and how they go about writing a thesis. Obviously, we teach them the basic understanding and our vocabulary and vernacular that goes with that. But I think this year specifically in my AP US history, I've been partnering with some other colleagues, an English colleague as well as a social studies colleague, to come up and use some formulas that will allow them to be successful answering their LEQs and DBQs, which are the longer writing samples they'll do on their exam. So I would say that that's a small thing I'm doing.
I remember last year teaching AP Lit, doing that formula too. And I think one of the things that always comes into my mind with writing is you need to learn the rules before you can break the rules. And so if you learn the formula of a thesis of what it needs and
right.
how to write it, and then you can do it quickly, because it's being able to process a whole bunch of information and write it in a concise way, right? But once you can do that, then you can start to manipulate how you write your thesis or where you put your thesis. But if you don't learn the rules first, then you can't play with it.
I think obviously I've done a lot of writing, like historical writing through university. I have my master's, things like that. So I've done all those things, but I think it almost comes naturally because I have the prior, experience doing those things. So I think, of course, my 15-year-olds are going to know how to do it, which is such a silly thought, how we have to really, like you said, break it down and teach them those things before allowing that power of choice later on. So
I think that's so powerful what you just said, because we make so many assumptions that, especially when we show our students, like, oh, here's a thesis, this is what you're going to do. And they're like, okay, but like, how do I do that? And if we don't break it down into like every simple little skill and give them strategies to work with and like multiple access points to it, then all they see is this end goal. And then I don't know how to do that. And their first one, you just write like this, you're missing this, or you need to fix this. And then they just get deflated. We just have so many assumptions as teachers.
Oh, for sure. I've been using the sports analogy of like shooting a layup versus going for a three. Like we got to get our layups real good and we'll break things down into smaller chunks prior to before we go just shoot some threes, and obviously my basketball history plays in that now, but kids get it. I mean, they start to understand that we can't just write a full LEQ, which is, oftentimes, a long, lengthy response. We got to build there. And so we're going to start with contextualization, and then we're going to move to thesis, and then we're going to move to sourcing. So yeah. Grade 9, I would say, is more diverse. We do a lot of creative writing. So they start in one of our first units, we do a model United Nations simulation, and they have to come up with essentially a proposal that they put in front of the UN. And so it is writing. It's more, they do it with a partner, and they collaborate to be able to present essentially, something to be passed in the General Assembly. And so it's more unique, and it's not so much like just base research, right? Argumentative in that way. We also do a unit with Masdar City where they go into and they do kind of a field study, and then they come back and they use their evidence to that is actually an argumentative one. The prompt to ask them if they believe that this idea of sustainability is valid, if it's something that Masdar City is upholding. So that's more of a field study where they'll go out, they'll collect evidence, and then they'll use it in their writing. So definitely had to shift our curriculum in how we go about processing materials, how we go about getting materials to them. I would say we've done more of smaller writing samples versus like kind of what I just mentioned, that like biting off large chunks of them responding. I think we are doing our best to allow for collaboration in a virtual environment because we know the importance of those things. And even like peer editing, the power of being able to use like a Google shared slides that everyone's editing together and putting ideas in, or Jamboard. I'm sure you've heard of Jamboard. That's a really cool way for us to, when we look for going to read an article and pulling evidence for a specific, argumentative claim, we'll make the claim as teachers, and they have to go find the evidence to back it and paste it on the Jamboard. That would be something that I wouldn't have done with Jamboard prior. I would have probably just done it verbally. But it also allows for a paper trail. So it allows for students to be able to go back in
Yeah.
I post all my Jamboards on Classroom.
Yeah.
They can go back in, they can look at what they've learned versus it all being verbal,
Mm-hmm.
which is pretty powerful. I think we record all of our lessons too, which this doesn't necessarily relate to writing, but everything's recorded. So kids have such an opportunity to go back in and look at what did we actually talk about, which I think is pretty cool. You know, there's a lot of things that I've learned during this COVID time that I'm like, we should have been doing it like this in the first place. I'm a student council advisor too, as you know, and I feel like almost everything we're doing in StuCo, I've like reversed my thought and how we do it. But anyway, yes, I do. I think we'll really slow down the process of, I've found that sometimes I feel pressure that maybe it's self-inflicted. With summative assessments, they have to be full meal deals. Like they have to be a full essay and and I just don't, that is so not true. You know, like we can have a summative introduction paragraph. Like we can really dive in and work on a kick butt intro and grade them summatively on their ability to provide, you know, lead ins to your thesis, to provide a hook, like those things versus, you know, teaching introduction, assessing it formally, teaching this, and then putting it all together in these large chunks. I also think it's just more doable for students that need support, like learning support. It really helps even the playing field a little bit with that. And then it also allows them to not have this like fear of the word summative. Because I feel like so many students have this like built up, like, oh, at the end of 7 weeks, we're going to do a summative. And it's like, no, like let's practice this process because it's a growing process. And it's the ability to understand that summatively, we're just really trying to check in with them. And it's, you know, yeah.
Well, and I think too, if you do an introduction little summative and a kid doesn't do very well, then the next time you're doing a new writing process, you see if their introductions have improved. They see if their introduction has improved. And then that grade is now their grade for introductions. And it's easier to reward kids when you do it that way and to structure them for success, essentially.
I would say with writing, I haven't done that as much, but I love what you just said about the idea of like doing it beside them. So that's something I would say I would want to improve in my teaching, but I do that in other skill sets or other skill areas. Yeah.
Right. I think it's so powerful. And I think too, if you were to write something like during that time and then show it and get their input, I find it so fun when you're like, okay, like where did I really mess up here? Where do I need to improve? And the first kid will put up their hand. They're like, well, like maybe you could change this. I'm like, yeah. And all of a sudden, all these hats. What about this? What about this? I'm like, okay,
yeah,
it wasn't that bad.
Yeah, relax. Yeah, but that's the fun part about high school kids. I think like when I do those multiple choice things, I'm a slow processor, so there's always students that'll beat me, and they just have so much beaming pride. I mean, we get the same answers, but like the timing and things like that. But that's where you relate to your kids, and yeah, I love that idea. I'll definitely have to think about that, doing that more. I do a lot of I do that in partnership with some color coding to identify things that we see in those mentor texts. I've done it a couple ways. I've done it where I show them prior to the skill development, and then I've done it where I've taught it, had them go around is what I like to say, and then we show them that mentor text. So I think that there's pros and cons to both in what you're working with. So I've done both of those, and that's something I think I'm trying to grow to in and add more to. I don't always do that revision part where I'll have them write something, I'll show them an example of a great one, and then I'll have them turn it in and I'll give them feedback. Rather than, one of the things I did last week that I was like, I really like this, is like they wrote their SAQ in black. We looked at an example SAQ, they added things in red. And then I went and graded it. So like it allowed me to see the differences in their thought process. And it was really telling to me because it allowed me to see, what did they get from the essentially mentor text or example that I gave them? Did I see any growth even within and that was kind of fun to see, is like, look at how much we grew in 30 minutes. Like we did this for 30 minutes, let alone if we commit to something and growth in a skill through the year.
Tom Schimmer talks about who's ever doing the grading, the marking is doing the learning. So what you just did was you allowed your students to mark their own stuff. And it's so much more powerful for them to see and to do that metacognition of what do I know and what don't I know, rather than us always just telling them and putting marks on a page to say you're missing this, you need to do this, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's part of that revision process is building their metacognition, which is really what they leave with at the end of school, is their ability to know how they learn. There's a book called Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. It's all about writing. And she talks about the shitty first draft, SFDs. And it revolutionized the way I teach and talk to my kids, because so often they'll procrastinate and write something the day before or 2 days before it's due. And what they're handing in is a shitty first draft. And number one, shitty first drafts are really important. We have to have, you can't go to a final draft. Like, it just doesn't.
Of course, yeah.
And number two, if you hand in a shitty first draft, you're probably going to be disappointed with your grade, because you didn't take time to get your ideas out and then go back in and revise a little bit.
Yeah.
Once students get that, once they think, okay, if I don't procrastinate, and if I do a shitty first draft first, then even just do a bit of revision, I'm going to be more proud of what I hand in.
Yeah, I definitely think giving kids the ability. I love a quick pace. I'm a quick pace car, so I like to push, and I think that's a growth area, not only in writing, but in other things that I need to be able to step back and say, okay, we're going to edit this, and it's going to take us a little bit longer, and that's okay, because there's powerful learning to be had in what it is that we're doing.
Well, and I think it just goes hand in hand with you breaking down the process anyways into smaller chunks.
Yeah. I think that, like, even as simple as saying, like, I have confidence in my ability to historically write. I think being able to hear them and be able to feel like they can write socially and emotionally and process things through writing. But I think, it's interesting. The tones of my classes are very different. My globals class is very, I don't want to say laissez-faire, because that's not true, but it's compared to my A-push class, where we're just like pedal to the metal. My A-push kids, I really hope they come out with confidence. I hope they come out understanding, when I get a historical question, I understand the process and I'm confident in my writing, because they're not right now. They're really not. And so that's something that I want to see and feel from them. I would say my globals kids, I would hope that they come out kind of what I mentioned, like the ability to, one, enjoy the process of writing and realize how powerful it is in our lives. Because whether or not you write and you journal, like I journal, but like whether or not you're doing those things, we use writing every single freaking day, more than almost any subject I would like to think. No offense to math and science, but I haven't had to combine chemicals to find the pH in a while. So, I mean, those are things that I hope my freshmen really realize, like, writing is a powerful thing. It's a way to process our feelings. It's a way to prep for a big moment in our life. It's a way to, there's creative ways to use it in our work. So yeah, I just think, like, understanding and appreciating writing is kind of cheesy, but I think that that's something I want my grade 9s to have.
I don't think that's cheesy at all. And I think if you give them the opportunities to do that, then that is what they will essentially come out with. But I also think if we show them that we are still doing it is also
right. Yeah.
Thank you so much for talking to me.
Yeah.
I look forward to checking in with you kind of in like the middle of the school year and just seeing where your kids' writing lives are, and if you've made any other realizations or shifts or whatnot. Yeah. I agree with you. I think writing is just such a powerful tool that we have, and especially in this time that we find ourselves in, culturally, politically, the power of the written word cannot be understated.
Hugely. Yeah.
Yeah, I think being able to expand our vocabulary, write to convey ourselves properly, is just the most incredible thing. So I love that you see writing as important in your classroom.
Yeah, no problem. I do.
Talk to you again. Thank you, Jordan, so much.
Yeah, of course.